Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Epic Comic Book Wednesdays. This is, for those of you, the four of you who watch, this is a collaboration between the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage, where Michael K Vaughan and I talk about the comic books on which we have wasted our youth. And since I horned my way in on a series that was going on his channel, which is a danger you all must live with, he gets to pick what we talk about. So it isn't Steve's greatest hits here on Epic Comic Book Wednesday, including a day like today, a day like no other. I wish I could say that, except Michael often strays into the rather dubious areas of his own tastes in comics. Today our character is Nick Fury, who had two different incarnations in classic incarnations in Marvel Comics. One was as a Marvel Comics World War II hero, Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos, which showed his adventures in World War II. Stan Lee and a lot of the other people in his bullpen of writers loved to write that sort of stuff, and readers at the time ate it up. And then later, Stan Lee had the idea that maybe we're not done with Nick Fury. Maybe we can bring him back. And he survived World War II, not intact. He has a famous eye patch now. He lost an eye, presumably in World War II, unless you're paying attention to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He presumably lost his eye in World War II, probably in the last skirmish of the last battle. And suddenly, in this new incarnation, the war has been over for 10 years, and he is a super spy. It was a big fad for super spies. So he is a super spy for an organization called S.H.I.E.L.D. Its letters are make up S.H.I.E.L.D. And it allowed Jack Kirby to do all kinds of weird technological stuff, which he sometimes liked to do, showing Nick Fury in combat, Nick Fury and his agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in combat against an organization called Hydra, which, if I remember correctly, Hydra is also an acronym. God, if I can't remember what S.H.I.E.L.D. stands for, I can't remember what Hydra stands for. But Hydra is a quasi-fascist institution that wants to take over the United States institutions of government for its own good in order to warp them in the forces of evil, of punishing poor people, of attacking their enemies, of basically instituting a kind of fascist regime in the country. So when Stan Lee's goal of portraying, quote, the world outside your window was voiced all those years ago, he had no idea that in the 2023 United States legislative session, Hydra is going to take control of the House of Representatives. There is no functional difference aside from the funky costumes between the characters in Stan Lee's comic books from the 1960s and the group of people who are taking control of the House of Representatives in order to, what's that you say? Lower your taxes, increase your infrastructure, protect you from online predators? No, they can't protect you from online predators since 1/3 of their membership are online predators. No, instead they're going to spend their time and a lot of your money investigating Hunter Biden's laptop. Hunter Biden's laptop is not mentioned by the Hydra in Stan Lee's comics, but nevertheless, they have one funky world-dominating plan after another, and Nick Fury has to stop them over and over again. An older Nick Fury with an eye patch has to stop them because he's become the leader of S.H.I.E.L.D. I don't know what this means. Is Nick Fury a government operative? Is S.H.I.E.L.D. a part of the government? It certainly takes arms manufacturing to a new level. It creates life. S.H.I.E.L.D. is hugely populated by androids that are so much like humans that they are frequently mistaken for the real thing. Life model decoys. You're not supposed to ask any of those questions, just like you're not supposed to ask any of the other questions that arise naturally from what I have referred to on Comic Book Wednesdays as the Stan Lee virus. Stan Lee introduces the virus of verisimilitude into his comic books. And that is seen 100% in Nick Fury. It only stops being true with Nick Fury at the point when it has to stop being true with any character. Superheroes have no business with verisimilitude because they aren't real. Nevertheless, in Nick Fury's story, in the early issues, I think it might be the first issue of the first appearance of S.H.I.E.L.D., he deals with the Fantastic Four, briefly. I think they appear in that first issue with Jack Kirby artwork. So if you were a Jack Kirby completist when it comes to the Fantastic Four, you would have to have Strange Tales stories of S.H.I.E.L.D. And The dialogue in that story makes it clear the problem that you have with Stan Lee Verisimilitude, which is that Nick Fury and Reed Richards and Ben Grimm were all in World War II. That's how they have such a nonchalant personal connection, because they were all in the big one. Nick Fury is just a little older. Like Reed Richards, he has gray in his temples. But that doesn't work once it's 1970, and then 1980, and then 1990, which is why gradually the idea that Reed Richards and Ben Grimm served in World War II has been worked out of the continuity in Marvel Comics. Now, if it comes up at all, a modern writer will say that they served together, but never that they served in World War II, because World War II was 100 years ago. So that's not possible. It's okay if it's Captain America, because you can just extend the length of time that he was in suspended animation. But what about Nick Fury? Can't write World War II out of his story because he was once Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos. Marvel Comics made a lot of money off his World War II adventures, so you can't write that out. And that, in the 1960s, it's okay for him to be the leader of S.H.I.E.L.D., having once been Sergeant Fury, because not that much time has passed. He could still be in the workforce. Not so in the 1970s, or the 1980s, or the 1990s, or the 2020s, which none of us thought we would ever reach. Other writers have had to go into the story of Nick Fury and come up with reasons why he's not simply dead of old age. But they've only come up with reasons why he isn't physically 120. There isn't any good reason why he isn't mentally 120. He should be a crappy old man. That's what he should be. He shouldn't be a ripped and buff hero mentally, even if he is physically. He should be an old man, a very old man, which means he should talk like an old man would. He was an old man, basically, when he was Sergeant Fury. What would an old man likely say? About, let's say, a Japanese Avenger. Or a Black Avenger. Nothing like that is ever even attempted. Now, Nick Fury would be the most odious character in Marvel Comics, not only because he would have all those Archie Bunker attitudes, but also because he's the ultimate military-industrial complex sellout. We're told over and over again in different Nick Fury appearances in different comic books that he knows the secret identity of every superhero, that he knows how to contact them. He's obviously angry with them. He fights Captain America several times in Captain America's own comic from the 70s. And every time he does, he fights Captain America because he's angry that Cap is not any older when he is. So he's psychologically damaged as well. All of which is good reason not to read this guy, even if you didn't have the really good reason that S.H.I.E.L.D. should really stand for. Should heroes include lame, extremely lame douchebags? That's what S.H.I.E.L.D. should stand for. Should heroes include extremely lame douchebags? When Nick Fury is going up against the forces of Hydra, and a Hydra agent yells, "Hail Hydra," and throws a grenade into the room, Nick Fury has to find a way to jump out the window. And then he'll use a spy gadget to survive the 70-foot drop. And the reason why he has to do that is because he's not from Krypton. So he can't just stand in the room and catch the grenade, or in order to protect the civilians in the room, catch the grenade and then swallow it. He can't do that. He has to flee for his life. If he's in an elevator and a Hydra agent pulls a gun, points it at his head, he either has to find a way to disarm that agent or he has to do whatever that agent says, because he's not from Krypton. So he's not bulletproof. So when he had his adventures in Strange Tales, I had no interest in reading them. Any more than I had any interest in reading about Sergeant Fury. Back then, I remember one time this broad came to our camp. "Oh, Grandpa." That's Nick Fury. That would be Nick Fury if we were talking about verisimilitude. But we're not. That would be one of the reasons why I wouldn't have read it. I was not such a diehard fan of Jack Kirby's artwork that I would go wherever he went. I didn't read or appreciate Jack Kirby's monster comics, for instance. So once I learned that this thing was just going to be the adventures of a normal guy in a three-piece suit, no, thank you. No, I'm not interested at all. I don't care who's writing it. I don't care who's drawing it. He's not bulletproof. He can't fly. In order to make a point, he has to shoot somebody. And then things got worse. Not from the comic standpoint, because the comic was always sort of weird. A spy comic in the age of superheroes. Stan Lee, of all people, should have known that he had killed the comic book industry that could once have supported such a thing. Instead, he thought, I've got the golden touch. And in his, in fairness to him, it worked for a long time. Anyway, he maybe did have the golden touch for a long time. But then the artwork changed. And here I run afoul not of old Nick Fury sitting in front of the TV wondering how the remote works. Here I run afoul of a creature that may, if anything, be more noxious, and that is the comic hipster. Now, Michael K. Vaughan is not a comic hipster. It's true that his comic book tastes have been tragically led astray on many a subject, as you will know if you watched his BookTube Awards just yesterday. Yours truly made the list once again for the worst BookTube video of the year, and specifically because the link takes you specifically to a video in which all I do is walk into little Mikey Vaughan's room. He's a tiny little kid. Take his horror comic books and just rip them. Where he's just sitting there on the floor going, no! That's all I did for all of that video. This is another one of those cases where anybody who grew up liking comic books obviously grew up kind of a nerd. So, someone familiar with wedgies, willies, and the dreaded Rear Admiral. And when that happens, if a cool kid starts honoring your hobby, you're going to venerate them like nobody's business. Now that might apply to Michael K. Vaughan, that part about venerating these cool kids. But the hipster part that he's not a part of, he is, thank God, not a comic hipster. The hipster part is the attitude that there's one particular cult way to interpret X, Y, or Z, usually an album, or the performance of a song, or the version of a movie, but it definitely applies to comic books. There's one particular way that my somehow inviolable tastes tell me is perfect, and everything else is kind of, I don't know. I mean, you like The Who? Well, I suppose. But there's a semi-apocryphal, informal recording that was done on a tape recorder of them when they didn't have the name The Who, before they'd signed a single contract, and that really was the best they ever were. Oh, you like Updike? Well, he once wrote 2 sentences of a thing on a napkin at a nightclub before he wrote a single word of his books. And it was all downhill after that. That's really the real Updike. That's the kind of hipster move. The kind that says, I like this thing before it was this thing. Or I like this thing when it was in its cult heyday, and I didn't like anything that it was beforehand when it was popular. I didn't like anything that was afterhand when it was popular. And invariably, when it comes to S.H.I.E.L.D, Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D, that hipster heyday is synonymous with 2 words. Jim Steranko. They invariably will say, oh, the Steranko run. Yeah, on S.H.I.E.L.D. Yeah, they even have one cover in mind. If you don't know this comic book at all, then you won't know the cover. But there's one cover in mind of Nick Fury in a spacesuit in orbit that is, it's Dude Bro Hipster Touchstone Gold. It is their Rosetta Stone. Jim Steranko was an artist, and he did intentionally, when he wasn't being kept under control by a contract, by deadlines, or by inking the work of better artists, when he was let work on his own, he had this very, I guess we could say, distinctive style. It's really bad. It's really, really bad. Unlike some other artists that were coming up at around the same time, for whom the same thing could be said, right? I mean, Jim Steranko cut his teeth on S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury by inking Jack Kirby's rough breakdowns. And who knows if that taught him anything about rough breakdowns. There wasn't anything Jack Kirby didn't know about comic book breakdowns and how to do them well. And you could say that a lot of the same stuff was true of Barry Windsor Smith back when he was just Barry Smith in his first few issues of Conan the Barbarian for Marvel Comics, where he wasn't inking panel breakdowns by Kirby, but he was very much drawing like Kirby. Now, when Barry Smith took on a middle name and flourished into his own kind of artistic style, it was genius. It was absolutely beautiful. And I guess the fanboys of Jim Steranko would say the same thing about him. I've never seen it. Never at all. I've never seen it. I think his work, once he is off the tether of inking better artists, is terrible. Boring and weird, but not in a good way. Weird, but not in a good way. You see it in this. You see it in his run on Captain America, which is another hipster touchstone. I always thought, I wasn't buying Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., but I was buying Captain America when Steranko took over the art, and I stopped. I thought, well, I'll stop for now, and I'll come back on. He won't stay long. He doesn't stay long anywhere. He won't stay long. He'll be gone, and whoever they pick after him will be better. Even George Tuska would be better. My shop guy at the time, not a comic shop, but a dry goods store, actually asked me, why ain't you getting Captain America anymore? He's the only one of these the guys I recognize, and you're not taking his comic anymore. I had to point out to him, well, you see, I opened it up on the counter and said, it's the artwork, and this is, and he said, nah, I don't really want to know. I stopped, and then started again. I haven't watched Michael K Vaughan's video once again this year. I think this will be our last Comic Book Wednesday for this year. And these last few, I haven't watched his video before I make my own, but I guarantee you he has a pile of this stuff. For all I know, he even has a collection of Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos. For all I know, that's true. And I don't mean to be going into little Mikey Vaughan's bedroom and tearing up his stuff again. I don't want to make next year's worst BookTube list. I will. We all know I will. Somehow or other I will. But that's your comic book for today. It's Nick Fury. First throwing bombs at German women and children, and then fighting Hydra as the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. without a single Kryptonian in sight. So there's only so much you can do with such raw material. I will give the original era of Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., so not Steranko, but Lee and Kirby. I will give that era its due in saying that Lee and Kirby did about as much with it as you could do. I would never reread those issues myself. Never. So we're ending our year of Comic Book Wednesdays on a bit of a disagreement. Not much, because Lee and Kirby can't ever be bad. And the Steranko issues, the artwork might bug me, but I realized that the writer was throwing his all into the story. Even, I guess, Steranko was throwing his all into the artwork once he was off the chain. So I guess legitimately you could like those things. They just don't do it for me. So this is not a barn-burning disagreement. Sometimes Michael and I have barn-burning disagreements where he's just completely wrong. Here, he's not completely wrong. So that's as close as we get to the amity of the Christmas season. But I want to thank you all. Before I wrap this up, this will be the last Epic Comic Book Wednesday of the year. And I want to thank you all, the 4 of you who watch these videos. It's been tremendous, tremendous fun. A lot of you have emailed me over the year and said, I'm not interested in comics at all, but I wouldn't miss this 2-part discussion that the 2 of you are having, especially when you're not, so to speak, on the same page. And I've had a few of you say, I'm not into comics, but I have to confess, when you make a video about Comic X, and Michael K Vaughan makes a video about Comic X, and it's obvious that you haven't collaborated ahead of time. He never sees my videos. He makes his early. He has to work for a living. I've had people say to me, when it's obvious that you haven't compared notes ahead of time, and you both sing its praises, I'm really curious, even though I don't read comics. I've had a couple of people tell me over the year that when that happens, that happy confluence where we both think something is just plain great, maybe we're concentrating on different areas of its greatness. I've had a couple of people say, I went to my library to find out if they could get a collection of this, specifically the collection you were both talking about. I think that's great. Absolutely great. And if you want, I'm sure that your library will have an epic collection, if there is one, of Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. I'm not sure that Marvel will vigorously reprint Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos, because so much of what's in those adventures is so politically incorrect now. The same thing is true of any World War II comic. Even Michael K Vaughan's beloved Sergeant Rock is going to have a hard time getting an omnibus edition because of a lot of what's in those issues. We shall see. We shall see what war comics do in the coming year. But for this year, I wanted to thank you all. This has been tremendous fun. So I'm going to wrap this Epic Comic Book Wednesday up for now. But, keep on trying, true believer. Enough said. Oh, Michael hasn't picked the Legion yet. Oh well.